At 2:31 a.m. on June 6, 1996, a frantic 911 call came from 5801 Eagle Drive in Rolette, Texas. In the background, the dispatcher could hear a television still playing and what sounded like a child's labored breathing. When Officer David Waddell arrived 4 minutes later, he found Darlie Rutier bleeding from her neck, pressing a towel to the wound, while her 2 young sons lay dying on the living room floor. The most shocking family massacre in Texas history had just occurred, but the evidence at the scene would tell a different story than the one Darlie was telling. Dust undisturbed beneath a cut window screen, a kitchen knife bearing only her fingerprints, and blood spatter patterns that defied the laws of physics if her account were true. What really happened in that house would divide a community, challenge forensic science, and leave questions that persist nearly 3 decades later. The Rutier family appeared to embody the American dream in suburban North Texas. They lived in a 2-story brick home at 5801 Eagle Drive in Rolette, a growing community just east of Dallas where new development sprouted from former farmland and young families filled the cul-de-sacs. Darlie Lynn Rutier, 26 years old, was a stay-at-home mother to 3 boys, 6-year-old Devin, 5-year-old Damon, and 7-month-old Drake. Her husband Darren, 28, owned a small electronics testing company called TestNet that operated out of their garage. To neighbors and friends, they seemed like the perfect family. Darlie was often seen playing with her boys in the front yard, organizing block parties, or chatting with other mothers at the community pool. Property records filed with Dallas County showed they had purchased the 3,200 square foot home in 1992 for $130,000, a significant investment for a young couple. Family photographs entered into evidence would later show birthday parties with elaborate decorations, Christmas mornings with presents piled high under the tree, and summer vacations to beaches and amusement parks. Darlie's mother, Darlie Key, would later testify that her daughter was devoted to her children, calling her the most loving mother you could imagine. But beneath this carefully maintained surface, financial records told a different story. Court filings and bank statements subpoenaed during the investigation revealed that TestNet's revenue had fallen sharply in early 1996. Business contracts that once brought in $8,000 monthly had dried up. By May, the Rutiers were 3 months behind on their mortgage payments. Credit card statements showed balances exceeding $20,000 across multiple accounts, all near their limits. A boat and a Jaguar purchased during better times now carried loans the family couldn't afford. Darlie's personal diary, authenticated and entered as evidence, contained entries that painted a picture of mounting desperation. On May 15th, she wrote, "Sometimes I feel so tired of trying to keep everything together." Another entry from May 28th read, "Darren works all the time, but the money never seems to be enough. I don't know how much longer I can pretend everything is okay." These private thoughts stood in stark contrast to the cheerful facade she maintained in public. The pressure seemed to peak in early June. On June 4th, Darren had told his business partner that he was considering bankruptcy. That same day, Darlie had called her mother-in-law, Cyrilda Rutier, asking if they could borrow money for groceries. The conversation, according to Cyrilda's later testimony, ended with Darlie in tears, saying she didn't know what they were going to do. On the night of June 5th, the family dynamic seemed oddly altered. Darren would later tell police that Darlie had suggested they all sleep downstairs because it was cooler. The boys on the floor, her on the couch. This was unusual. The children typically slept in their upstairs bedrooms. Darren went upstairs with baby Drake around 10 p.m., leaving Darlie watching television with Devin and Damon. The last thing he remembered was the sound of the TV and his wife's voice telling the boys to settle down for sleep. What happened next would shatter not just one family, but an entire community's sense of safety. The events of the early morning hours of June 6th would raise questions that investigators, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and the public would debate for decades to come. At 2:31 a.m., Darlie Rutier's voice crackled through the 911 system. "They just stabbed me and my children." The call, which lasted 5 minutes and 44 seconds, would become the most analyzed piece of evidence in the case. Dispatcher Doris Trammell noted in her report that Darlie's voice fluctuated between hysteria and strange calm. At one point, Darlie could be heard saying to someone in the room, "Don't touch anything." Then immediately after, "We've got to find out who did this." Officer David Waddell arrived at 2:35 a.m., followed quickly by Sergeant Matthew Walling. Their reports, filed that morning and later entered into evidence, described a scene of controlled chaos. Darlie stood in the kitchen, blood streaming from a neck wound, pressing a wet towel against it. On the living room floor lay Devin and Damon, both with multiple stab wounds to their torsos. Paramedic Jack Colby's report noted that Devin had no pulse upon their arrival. Damon was barely breathing and would be pronounced dead at 2:55 a.m. after transport to Baylor Medical Center. The physical evidence at the scene immediately raised questions. Crime scene technician James Cron's report, filed as State's Exhibit 47, documented several anomalies. The garage window screen had been cut, suggesting an intruder's entry point, but the dust on the windowsill remained completely undisturbed. No handprints, no smears, no indication anyone had climbed through. The direction of the screen fibers suggested the cut had been made from inside pushing out, not outside pushing in. Blood evidence added more puzzles. Luminol testing revealed cast-off patterns on the walls above the kitchen sink, the kind of spatter created when blood flies off a weapon during upward motion. But these patterns were at adult shoulder height, not the lower level expected if someone was bending down to attack children on the floor. Most tellingly, there was no blood trail leading to or from the supposed exit point. The murder weapon, a butcher knife from the Rutier's own kitchen block, lay on the counter. Crime lab analyst Charles Lynch would later testify that only Darlie's prints were found on the handle, in a grip pattern consistent with holding the knife in an overhand position. No smudges, no partial prints, no evidence of gloves or wiping, just Darlie's clear fingerprints. Detective Jimmy Patterson conducted the first formal interview with Darlie at Baylor Medical Center at 4:30 a.m., less than 2 hours after the attack. His written notes, introduced as evidence, show Darlie's account. She had fallen asleep on the couch, watching television. She woke to Damon touching her shoulder, saying, "Mommy." She saw a man at the end of the couch, walking away toward the kitchen. She followed him through the utility room and into the garage. When she returned, she realized she and the children were hurt. But by her second interview at 8 a.m., details had shifted. Now she remembered the intruder dropping the knife in the utility room, and she had picked it up. By the third interview that afternoon, she recalled struggling with the intruder, though she couldn't explain why she had no defensive wounds on her hands or arms, only the neck slash and some bruising on her right arm. The medical evidence created its own contradictions. Dr. Santos, the emergency room physician who treated Darlie, documented in his report that her neck wound, while requiring stitches, was superficial and had missed the carotid artery by 2 millimeters. The bruising on her arm was consistent with self-infliction, not defensive wounds. In contrast, the medical examiner's reports on Devin and Damon showed deep, penetrating wounds that had punctured lungs and vital organs, wounds that required significant force and seemed deliberate rather than random. On June 8th, a critical piece of evidence emerged. The Rutier's neighbor, Karen Neal, came forward with security camera footage from her home. Time-stamped at 2:15 a.m., it showed the Rutier house with all lights off, contradicting Darlie's claim that she had been awake watching television. The prosecutor would later argue this suggested Darlie had staged the scene after attacking her children. By June 10th, blood evidence analyst Tom Bevel had completed his preliminary analysis. His report concluded that blood on the back of Darlie's nightshirt contained cast-off patterns consistent with her wielding the knife during the attacks. The blood was from both boys, mixed with hers, in a pattern that suggested she was standing over them during the stabbing, not lying on the couch as she claimed. Perhaps the most damaging evidence came on June 14th, what would have been Devon's 7th birthday. The family held a graveside birthday party at Rest Haven Cemetery. For the first 7 minutes captured by a mourner's camcorder, the family prayed and cried. But then, as news cameras arrived, the mood shifted. Warrant affidavit, signed by Detective Jimmy Patterson, outlined the investigators' growing doubts about her version of events. It cited the physical evidence that seemed to contradict her account of an intruder, the inconsistencies in her story, and what detectives described as staged elements of the crime scene. The courtroom was packed with journalists, spectators, and family members from both sides. Prosecutor Greg Davis, leading the state's case, delivered a calm but relentless presentation built heavily on forensic science and crime scene analysis. Among the most critical witnesses for the prosecution was blood spatter expert Tom Bevel, who testified for 3 consecutive days. Using diagrams, photographs, and laser pointers, Bevel described how the blood patterns on Darley's nightshirt aligned with movements consistent with an assailant standing and stabbing downward. According to his testimony, the stains showed cast-off and backspatter patterns that would have been impossible had Darley been lying down during an attack. The prosecution introduced multiple exhibits, State's Exhibit 38A through F, including photographs of the garage windowsill coated in undisturbed dust, the inward cut screen that suggested someone cut it from inside the house, and the notable absence of blood in the garage or yard areas where Darley claimed the intruder fled. Prosecutors argued that these details painted a clear picture. There was no intruder. Instead, they claimed Darley herself had killed her children, staged the scene, and inflicted superficial wounds upon herself to support her story. Defense attorney Doug Mulder, one of the most respected criminal lawyers in Texas, countered that the police had made up their minds too quickly. He argued that evidence had been mishandled, that crime scene technicians had contaminated key materials, and that the prosecution's narrative relied more on assumptions than proof. To challenge Bevel's findings, the defense brought in their own forensic expert, who suggested that contamination and poor evidence preservation could explain the blood patterns. They emphasized that investigators had failed to properly secure the home in the crucial early hours, allowing officers, paramedics, and neighbors to move freely through the house, potentially disturbing evidence. The defense also pointed to the mysterious bloody fingerprint found on the glass coffee table, one that did not match Darley, her husband Darren, or either of the boys. That fingerprint, they argued, was the most direct indication that someone else had been present that night. They maintained that Darley's injuries, though not fatal, were consistent with a surprise attack. Yet, one piece of evidence would overshadow all of it: the now infamous silly string video. The prosecution seized upon the latter footage as evidence of her callousness and lack of remorse. Despite the defense's attempts to contextualize it, arguing that the family had grieved privately before trying to honor the boys' joyful spirits, the image of Darley laughing at the gravesite deeply affected the jury. One juror, Charles Samford, later remarked in an interview, "That video showed us who she really was." On February 1, 1997, after 10 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict: guilty of capital murder in the death of Damon Rutier. 2 days later, following 13 additional hours of penalty deliberations, the same jury sentenced her to death. She was never tried for Devon's murder, as prosecutors stated one conviction was sufficient. Since her conviction, Darley Rutier has remained on death row at the Mountain View unit in Gatesville, Texas. From her cell, she has continued to insist on her innocence, maintaining that an unidentified intruder committed the murders. Over the years, her case has become one of the most polarizing in American criminal justice, sparking books, documentaries, and heated online debates.
A mother on death row, 2 children buried. It is the case that people here have talked about for decades. Tonight, the story of Darlie Rutier is being shared with America. As you just saw, she is the focus of a new series on ABC. And just like in 1996, some people have real doubts about her guilt.
And now, no one wants to believe that a mother could kill her own children. Teresa Woodard spoke to the lead prosecutor in this case. So, Teresa, he doesn't sound like he has any doubts.
Oh, there is zero doubt in his mind. Toby Shook was interviewed for this ABC documentary. He certainly understands why this is a compelling case. For 22 years, Darlie Rutier has maintained her innocence, but he says she murdered her children.
The physical evidence that convicted her has been re-examined multiple times with the advancement of DNA technology. Each new test seemed to offer both sides ammunition. In 2002, her attorneys filed motions for additional DNA testing on several pieces of evidence that had not been analyzed with newer methods. It took several years, but by 2008, the courts approved testing of the bloody fingerprint, the sock found 75 yards from the house, and various small blood samples. The results were mixed. Some items revealed traces of unknown male DNA, but due to degradation, the findings were inconclusive. The unidentified fingerprint remained unmatched to any known person in law enforcement databases. Then, in 2015, her defense team made another discovery that reignited interest in the case. They found that the bloody sock, containing blood from both Devin and Damon, had never been tested for skin cells or touch DNA on its interior surface. Subsequent testing revealed DNA from an unknown source. For Darlie's supporters, it was proof of her innocence. For prosecutors, it was an irrelevant anomaly. They argued that one unexplained piece of evidence did not negate the overwhelming body of proof pointing to Darlie's guilt. The appeals court agreed, stating that the totality of the evidence still supported the original verdict. As the years passed, Darlie's case came to symbolize broader questions about fairness, forensic reliability, and bias within the justice system. Critics of her conviction highlight what they call demeanor evidence, the reliance on subjective judgments of how a grieving mother should behave. Others point to the state's heavy emphasis on visual impressions, such as the silly string video, rather than hard forensic contradictions. Texas, a state known for its use of the death penalty, has seen several individuals exonerated through DNA evidence after years on death row. Organizations like the Innocence Project of Texas have referenced the Rutier case in their advocacy for forensic science reform, mandatory preservation of biological evidence, and the recording of all interrogations in capital cases. Today, Darlie remains one of 6 women on Texas death row. Her legal team continues to pursue appeals based on alleged gender bias, prosecutorial misconduct, and outdated forensic techniques. Meanwhile, the state maintains its stance that the evidence, from the blood spatter to the crime scene reconstruction, proves beyond reasonable doubt that she staged a break-in and murdered her children. Every year, on June 6th, 2 separate gatherings take place in Rowlett. At the cemetery, friends and relatives of Devin and Damon Rutier meet quietly to honor the boys' memory. They bring candles, flowers, and small toys, reminders of the 2 little brothers who loved Power Rangers, baseball, and watching television late into the night. Across town, another group gathers for a different purpose, to call for Darlie's exoneration. Wearing ribbons that read, "Justice for Darlie," they light candles of their own, insisting that the wrong person was convicted. The family home at 5801 Eagle Drive still stands. The Rutier lost it to foreclosure not long after the murders. Over the years, it has changed hands several times, often selling below market value. Neighbors say the house draws occasional drive-by visitors, true crime enthusiasts and curiosity seekers, hoping to catch a glimpse of the site where the tragedy unfolded nearly 30 years ago. Inside police archives, the case files now span thousands of pages. Crime scene photographs, autopsy reports, witness statements, and court transcripts. Each document reflects another attempt to reconstruct what happened in the early morning hours of June 6, 1996. Yet even after decades of analysis, documentaries, and appeals, one haunting question remains unanswered. Was Darlie Rutier a cold-blooded murderer who killed her sons in their sleep, or a victim herself of a flawed investigation and a rush to judgment? The Rutier case left a lasting mark on Texas law. In the years following the conviction, legislators introduced new requirements for the preservation of biological evidence in capital cases, as well as laws mandating recorded interrogations. Criminal justice programs across the state now use the Rutier case as a teaching example, showing how the same evidence can be interpreted in vastly different ways depending on perspective and bias. For those seeking information about wrongful convictions or resources for families affected by violent crime, the National Center for Victims of Crime offers support through its hotline at 1-800-FYI-CALL. The Innocence Project also continues to work on cases where advanced DNA testing may overturn wrongful convictions. Today, nearly 3 decades later, the truth of what happened inside that suburban home may still lie hidden, in sealed evidence bags, in forgotten lab reports, or in the fading memories of those who lived through it. But for Devin and Damon Rutier, 2 boys whose lives ended far too soon, the silence that lingers on Eagle Drive remains the most powerful testimony of all. Now, for our next case, we'll be talking about another kind of heartbreak, a tragedy where 2 siblings lost their lives, much like in the previous story. But this time, it wasn't their parents or any relative behind it. It was someone they once called a friend, someone they trusted, who later turned against them. This is the story of the Maguad siblings. They say kindness is the best gift you can give, but what if that gift turns into your worst nightmare? That's exactly what happened when Janice posted this chilling status on Facebook, begging for help, saying she and her siblings were under attack. What no one knew at the time was that this cry for help would spark one of the most horrifying and shocking cases the Philippines had ever witnessed. The case was so disturbingly gruesome and eerily bizarre that it's compared to a famous movie. And by the time you reach the end of this video, you'll be questioning every act of kindness you've ever given, and just how horrifying it can be when it falls into the wrong hands. To really get the picture, let's head over to the small, quiet town of Malang in North Cotabato, Philippines. It's a place known for its calm vibe and rural charm, where life moves at a slower pace. People here are deeply connected to the land, relying on agriculture for their livelihood, growing staples like rice, corn, and vegetables. In this peaceful town lived the Maguad family. Unlike many others, they led a pretty stable life. Cruz Maguad, the father, was an elementary school teacher. He was well respected and loved by everyone, constantly being praised for his hard work. A promotion was even on the horizon, which meant he was doing pretty well financially. His wife, Lavella, was the principal at the same school. Together, they didn't make crazy money, but they were considered one of the more privileged families in town. Their youngest child, Louis, also known as Boy Boy, was 16. He dreamed of becoming a lawyer, even at his young age, and he was determined to work hard to get there. Aside from being smart, he was also creative, playing guitar, drawing, and reading in his spare time. Gwen, his older sister, was the more intense one. Super smart, driven, and goal-oriented, she had always been this way. As a kid, she was a Girl Scout, and her sash was covered in so many badges that there was no room for more. Gwen didn't just stop there. She enrolled in a pre-med prep program during high school and planned to become a doctor. By all accounts, Gwen was the type of person who would sit with you at a party if you were feeling shy, sticking by your side until you felt at ease. That's exactly how she met 17-year-old Janice. But unlike Gwen and Louis, Janice's childhood was far from happy. She wasn't privileged enough to attend school and had to work from a very young age. Even worse, she grew up without parents. Her first real memory started when she was around 8 years old. Before that, everything was a blur. She only remembers being found by a stranger, wandering alone on a huge shipping container boat. Her parents were nowhere to be found, and Janice believed they had abandoned her. The stranger was kind enough to post her picture and name online, trying to find her parents. They shared her story on Facebook and various online forums, but no one ever came forward. Eventually, Janice was dropped off at the Philippines version of CPS, the Department of Social Welfare and Development, where she moved from one foster home to another. Not long after, Janice was offered a live-in nanny job by a family. Though she hated the job, she was incredibly grateful for the opportunity. Janice shared all of this with Gwen, and Gwen was so deeply moved by her story that an idea began to form in her mind. An idea that could give Janice the safe, loving home she deserved: adoption. Gwen, together with Louis, decided to present the idea to their parents like a well-thought-out thesis. They approached the subject with serious dedication, telling their parents that adopting Janice wouldn't just change her life, it would help their family too. They convinced their parents that Janice could pitch in with the chores around the house, which was a big deal in their Asian family culture. It wasn't uncommon for children to share the responsibility of washing dishes, cleaning, and cooking. With one more set of hands to help, the family would run more smoothly. Gwen's parents weren't exactly rolling in money, but they believed in teaching responsibility. The kids had chores, had to keep their grades up, and attend church every Sunday. They were strict, but it was out of love, and Gwen and Louis respected that. That strong connection gave Gwen and Louis the courage to ask for something as big as adopting Janice. In 2021, Janice moved in, and it was like she was instantly part of the family. The Maguads welcomed her with open arms. Louis even gave up his own room just so Janice could have a more comfortable one. They enrolled her in school right away, and for the first time, Janice didn't wake up with the constant worry of finding food or going to work. She was finally allowed to be a kid. As Janice settled into her new life, the bond between the three siblings grew stronger by the day. You could see the happiness shining through, especially in the videos they posted on TikTok. Janice even got to experience a family vacation for the first time, something she had always dreamed of. Laughter filled the air as they explored new places together, creating memories she would cherish forever. For once, Janice felt like she belonged to something bigger, something safe, and full of love. But just when everything seemed perfect, Janice's world was about to shatter. On the 10th of December that same year, she posted a series of statuses on Facebook, claiming that she and her siblings were under attack. It was just days before Christmas, a time that should have been filled with joy. But instead, it was the beginning of a nightmare. At that time, Mr. Cruz, the father, was at school, doing some chores related to the upcoming holiday. Lavella, the mother, was away on a work trip. But everything changed when Mr. Cruz received a phone call that left him frozen in terror. The voice on the other end told him that their home was being ransacked, and his children were there. By 3:15 in the afternoon, Cruz finally arrived at the house. It was eerily silent. Outside the front door, his eyes locked onto a blood-soaked blanket on the ground, with a knife nearby. He called out for his kids, but there was no response. He moved quickly to the back door and managed to find a way inside. Cruz moved rapidly through the house, his voice echoing off the walls as he searched for his children. It wasn't until he entered the living room that his worst nightmare became a horrifying reality. There, lying on the floor, was his daughter Gwen. A towel soaked in blood was wrapped around her body. Her limbs and torso were covered in multiple slash wounds, but it was the injuries on her neck that were particularly severe. Crime scene photos later revealed the gruesome extent of the wounds. Her flesh was torn apart, and ants had already begun to gather on her body. Not far from Gwen, near the main door, Cruz found Louis. His hands and feet were bound, and a gag covered his mouth. His body was riddled with fresh stab wounds. The amount of blood suggested the attack had happened just moments before Cruz arrived. But there was one more person missing: Janice. Cruz's heart pounded as he continued to search the house, calling her name. Then, finally, Janice appeared. She emerged from her room, her hair wet, her face pale and shaken. She was in shock, barely able to speak. Seeing her, Cruz immediately called the police. The officers arrived soon after, stepping into a crime scene that would later be described as one of the most gruesome in the Philippines. Blood pooled on the floor, and the house bore the marks of extreme violence. Janice, while trembling, told the officers that they had been attacked. The house was in disarray. Cabinets had been pried open, and personal belongings were scattered across the rooms. At first glance, it seemed like a robbery. However, investigators knew that appearances could be deceiving. They needed to confirm whether anything valuable had been taken to solidify the robbery theory. At the same time, as part of their protocol, the police didn't rule out the parents as persons of interest. They needed to confirm their alibis and whereabouts during the attack. The investigators turned their attention to the room where Janice said she was hiding during the attack. It was messy, but that wasn't unusual for a robbery scene. What stood out, though, were the details that didn't add up. The disarray in the room, though chaotic, didn't have the usual signs of a real robbery. So, the police began to search the house more carefully, and they soon found some crucial evidence. Just outside the front door, the police discovered a blood-stained shirt, which they believed had been dropped by the attacker while trying to escape. And about 100 meters away, they found a plastic bag in a ditch. Inside it were bloody pants and underwear. It seemed like the attacker had deliberately thrown these items away to hide evidence. Inside the house, the scene was increasingly horrifying. Near the front door, officers found a knife with a broken handle, its blade slick with blood. The living room floor was littered with shards of glass and broken bottles, a clear sign of the violence that had unfolded there. Expansive pools of blood painted a grim picture, revealing the brutal nature of the attack. Among the carnage, investigators discovered a discarded machete, a baseball bat, and a hammer, each stained with blood. These weapons were assumed to be used in the murders. Crime scene analysts took careful note of the blood patterns, which provided key insights into the sequence of events. They determined that Gwen, the older sibling, had likely been killed first. Her blood had partially coagulated, and rigor mortis had already begun to set in. In contrast, Lewis's blood appeared much fresher, suggesting he had been murdered shortly after Gwen. The different states of the blood and bodies made this theory even more plausible. Louis's hands and feet were bound, while Gwen's were not. This discrepancy indicated that Gwen might have been ambushed and killed quickly, while Lewis was restrained, likely to prevent him from resisting before his own murder. The variety of weapons found at the scene, ranging from a broken knife to a machete, baseball bat, and hammer, raised troubling questions for the investigative team. The fact that so many different tools were used, and that the victims had distinctive types of wounds, strongly suggested the involvement of more than one attacker. This theory was supported by the fact that Louis had been restrained. It would have been difficult for a single person to control a victim while also carrying out such a brutal attack. Adding to the mystery, Cruz, the sibling's father, confirmed that the weapons found at the scene were his. The murderers seemed to have used tools that were readily available in the house, which made the crime even more unsettling. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every week, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot. As investigators continued to gather evidence, they found something that stood out. The family's laundry machine had been used, but there were no freshly washed clothes anywhere in the house. This odd discovery suggested that something unusual had happened after the crime, perhaps an attempt to erase evidence or cover their tracks. The extreme brutality of the crime prompted local authorities to launch a manhunt for the suspects. The public was shocked, and the need for justice became urgent. To help with the investigation, the vice of the Municipal Council of Malang, North Cotabato, announced a reward of 200,000 pesos for any information leading to the capture of the perpetrators. The mayor also offered an additional 50,000 pesos as a bounty. These actions emphasize the gravity of the case and the community's desperate need for answers. An autopsy was performed on Gwen and Lewis, spanning 2 days, starting on December 13, 2021, and the results were chilling. Gwen had sustained 32 stab and slash wounds, some of which were deep enough to almost sever her limbs. One of her ears had been cut off, and her neck and upper arm were nearly severed. Her body also showed signs of blunt force trauma, likely caused by the hammer and baseball bat found at the scene. Additionally, the backs of her hands were bruised and covered in defensive wounds, indicating that she had fought fiercely until the end. Meanwhile, Louis had endured 51 knife wounds, some so deep that they exposed his bone and internal organs. Red marks on his neck suggested he may have been strangled. Unlike his sister, Louis had no defensive wounds, implying that he was caught off guard and unable to fight back. He also had signs of blunt force trauma on his limbs and torso. All these injuries were consistent with the weapons recovered at the scene. Investigators quickly ruled out the possibility of a robbery gone wrong. The scene had been staged. While the rooms appeared ransacked, only Gwen's phone was missing. Nothing else of value had been taken, leading authorities to believe that the killer or killers were familiar with the victims. It was also striking that the crime took place in broad daylight, which made the entire situation even more unsettling. Before the autopsy results were made public, rumors began circulating online, accusing Janice of being involved in the crime. These rumors gained traction due to her survival, the weapons being from the family home, and the locked front door. The accusations grew increasingly intense, with some even threatening Janice. Under the mounting pressure, the police decided to question her. Janice described the events of that day. She had been studying with Gwen in her bedroom while Louis was downstairs in the living room. Suddenly, they heard Louis screaming, and 3 men broke into the house. The 2 girls rushed downstairs and saw the 3 men attacking Louis with the weapons found at the scene. The attackers then turned on Gwen, and in fear, Janice fled upstairs, locked herself in the bedroom, and hid under the bed. She was too scared to call the cops, so instead, she texted the family group chat asking for help. Later, she messaged her adopted mom saying, "Mom, help." When no one saw those messages, Janice went a step further and posted on social media, saying, "Help! Somebody has broken into the house. I don't want to die. I'm hiding in my room. Help!" After a few minutes, she deleted the post, worried the attackers might see it and come after her. She tried calling her mom, but there was no answer. By the time someone saw the post and reached out to her mom, Janice was too scared to pick up. She went as far as changing her social media username and turning her phone to silent, clearly trying to hide. When the house finally fell silent, Janice emerged from her hiding place, too afraid to go downstairs. She claimed she took a shower and changed clothes to calm herself, finishing just as Cruz arrived home. But there was something odd about this part of the story. Janice had told the police she locked herself in her bedroom the second the attack started. So why did her room look like it had been ransacked? That raised some serious questions. More importantly, Janice's version of events was directly at odds with the forensic evidence. The autopsy results and the way the injuries were distributed made it clear that Gwen was the first victim, not Louis. This major discrepancy between Janice's account and the evidence made investigators even more suspicious. Something wasn't adding up, and they started to take a closer look at Janice's statements. At first, she told the police her phone was off during the attack, but Cruz remembered calling her phone and hearing it ring with no answer. When Janice was confronted with this, she changed her story again, now claiming that she had been in the shower and hadn't heard her phone ringing. This was starting to sound fishy. In a case like this, who on earth could actually take a shower while their siblings were being attacked? It's just hard to wrap your head around, right? But that wasn't the only thing that raised eyebrows. Cruz also revealed some things about the murder weapons that added fuel to the fire. The baseball bat used in the attack originally belonged to Louis. He had kept it in his room on the top bunk as a kind of protection. But after being adopted by Cruz, Janice had taken over the top bunk. The hammer used in the attack was another tool that Cruz kept around for home repairs. He was very careful about where he kept it, usually hiding it behind the washing machine. Cruz mentioned that only 3 people knew exactly where that hammer was: himself, Gwen, and Janice. This meant that the killer or killers had to have known the family's routines and possessions really well, almost like they had been living in the house with them. Things got even more suspicious when a delivery driver came forward. The driver had arrived at the house just 18 minutes before Cruz was contacted by a neighbor who noticed no one had answered the door. The driver kept calling out, hoping someone would respond. Eventually, he noticed a woman peering at him through a door before she suddenly walked away. The woman's identity was never confirmed, but it raised serious doubts about where Janice was and what she was doing during the crucial moments of the attack. Another key clue came from the front door. It had been locked from the inside, and there were no signs of forced entry. This was a big deal because it meant that whoever had done this was probably someone who was familiar with the house, someone who had access to a key and could lock the door after the crime. At this point, it's pretty clear that Janice had something to do with the murders. However, since Janice was only 17 years old, still a minor under Philippine law, the police couldn't arrest her without solid proof. This legal issue made them tread carefully, as they couldn't move forward with an arrest until they had more definitive evidence. Instead of arresting her right away, the authorities placed Janice under the care of the Social Welfare Department, while the investigation turned to finding out who actually committed the murders. If Janice's claim about other people being involved was true, the police had a lot of work ahead of them. 5 days after the murders, a significant breakthrough occurred. The police discovered Janice's fingerprints on the murder weapons. This was a huge deal, but it wasn't the smoking gun. After all, Janice had lived in the house where the weapons were stored, so her prints could have been there simply from handling them. Still, it was a lead they couldn't ignore. To ensure she wasn't treated unfairly, Janice was given a lawyer by the Social Welfare Department. But things took another unexpected turn when Lavella, Janice's adoptive mother, found a contact tracing form while searching Janice's room for clues. The surprise? It wasn't Janice's form. It belonged to a 17-year-old boy named Esmeraldo Aldo Canedo Jr. Aldo was a sacristan at a local church, and Janice had known him from the orphanage. This discovery sent the police scrambling to figure out if Aldo had anything to do with the murders. And soon enough, witnesses came forward, confirming Aldo had been near the crime scene on the day of the killings. One woman said she saw Aldo drop Janice off near the house right before the murders, and another neighbor said she saw him asking for directions to the house that morning. When shown a picture of Aldo, the woman immediately recognized him. Then on December 16th, 6 days after the murder, Janice, with her lawyer present, gave a full confession. She admitted to being involved in the murders along with Aldo and her so-called 21-year-old boyfriend, who was unnamed. Janice explained that her motive was deep resentment and jealousy. She felt that Gwen and Louis were getting all the love and attention from their parents, and in her mind, they were standing in the way of her getting the affection she had longed for. She even confessed that killing them would leave her as the only child in the family, guaranteeing she'd get all the love and attention she'd recently started experiencing after being adopted. Janice revealed that her ultimate goal was to take Gwen's place in the family, driven by years of emotional neglect in the orphanage where she had grown up. By December 18th, Janice's confession was officially recorded, though it was inconsistent, much like many of her previous statements. The police tracked down Aldo, who voluntarily surrendered, admitting his role too. Forensic analysis later confirmed that blood found on discarded clothing in a ditch belonged to Aldo. Like Janice, Aldo was a minor, so he was placed under the care of the Social Welfare Department. Later that same day, in an unrelated drug raid, police arrested a 17-year-old for possession of illegal substances. When they searched his phone, they found something that tied him to the case: Gwen's stolen cell phone. The serial number confirmed it had been taken after the murders. The police pieced it together. Janice had enlisted Aldo to sell the phone because she couldn't get rid of it herself due to growing suspicion. Unfortunately, the phone had been water damaged, making it impossible to retrieve any useful data. The boy who had the phone wasn't involved in the murders. He had simply bought it from Aldo. Because Janice and Aldo were minors, the police couldn't release any juicy details about their confessions to the public, despite the parents pressing for information. As the investigation progressed, Janice stopped cooperating, making it even harder to figure out exactly what had happened. Later on, it was revealed that Janice's 21-year-old boyfriend was just her imaginary boyfriend, and that really makes you question everything, especially since she had further stated that there were 3 people involved in the attack. Some people believe Janice's confessions weren't even the full story. Whispers circulated that the murders were even worse than she had let on, like the possibility that Louis was tied up and forced to watch as his sister was murdered before he was killed as well. After the shocking confessions, Lavella, the siblings' mother, was interviewed and reflected on the warning signs she missed. According to Lavella, they had adopted Janice 5 months before the murders. At first, everything seemed fine. The family welcomed her, and she appeared grateful. But soon, small red flags started to show. In August 2021, when Lavella's parents were hospitalized with COVID-19, Cruz noticed that 10,000 pesos, about $170, set aside for emergencies was missing. Janice claimed thieves had taken it, but the next day, a large sum was found hidden in her school bag. After some questioning, Janice admitted she had taken the money. Despite the breach of trust, the family, particularly Gwen, chose to forgive her. They were sympathetic to her troubled past, chalking up the theft to the survival instincts she had developed after years of hardship. Janice apologized, and the family, hoping this was a one-time mistake, accepted it, believing the worst was behind them. But as months passed, Janice's behavior started to shift in unsettling ways. Once known for her strong work ethic, which had been one of the reasons the family adopted her, she became lazy and irresponsible. Household chores were neglected, and when reminded, she apologized but never followed through. While troubling, it didn't raise any immediate alarms until the morning of the murders. That day, Janice did something she had never done before. She called Cruz and Lavella Mom and Dad for the first time. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a red flag, an indication of a deeper, darker shift in her emotional state. It was as if something had clicked in her mind, and what was about to happen was set in motion. As the investigation unfolded, more shocking truths came to light. Janice had lied about her origins from the start. Her story of being an orphan was a fabrication. Her parents were alive and had spent years desperately searching for her. When the case went viral, Filipino amateur sleuths dug into her past and uncovered a nearly decade-old missing persons notice. Like I mentioned earlier, Janice was discovered by a stranger in a cargo boat back in 2013, but no one could recognize her at the time. Her parents, especially her mom, weren't really active on Facebook back then, so they missed the post. Fast forward to the murders, and that same post started making rounds online again. It didn't take long for Janice's biological parents to recognize her. Born in 2005, Janice was the youngest of 3 kids, but her childhood was filled with chaos. Her dad's gambling addiction tore the family apart, and her mom, after remarrying, tried to make the best of things by splitting up what little they had left for her kids. Eventually, Janice and her siblings were placed in different orphanages. By 2020, Janice had actually reunited with her biological family, but that didn't last long. Her relatives later claimed she cut them off, saying they were too poor to be of any use to her. That betrayal shocked everyone, but things took a darker turn when Janice's biological mother, devastated by what her daughter had done, attended the funeral of Gwen and Louis. In her grief, she kept apologizing, full of guilt over her daughter's actions. In one heartbreaking moment, Janice's biological mom even kneeled down, But the Maguad parents weren't out for revenge. They made it clear that they weren't angry, just seeking justice. They insisted that Janice's biological mom encourage her daughter to confess. Janice's mother tried to visit her at the social welfare office, but Janice refused to see her, citing strict rules. Then, the investigation took a jaw-dropping turn. Evidence surfaced that suggested the murders were premeditated. Screenshots of a conversation between Janice and an unknown person went viral. In the messages, Janice confessed that she wanted to kill her siblings, thinking their deaths would give her the freedom she craved. She even wondered if anyone would still accept her if she committed murder, expressing a chilling belief that no matter what she did, God would forgive her if she just asked. Some sources later claimed that Janice often talked about the 2009 horror movie Orphan, a film about a young girl adopted by a family who ultimately betrays and kills them. She even posted on Facebook that she loved the movie and watched it repeatedly. When Janice's trial began, her behavior was just as disturbing as the crime itself. She was seen smiling and laughing at her parents, showing no remorse or regret. Cruz and Lavella, devastated by the loss of their children, said in interviews that they might have forgiven Janice if she had shown even a hint of genuine remorse. But her coldness only made their pain worse. The case became a national sensation in the Philippines. From March 2022, when Janice and Esmeralda were officially charged with murder, to their conviction on May 17, 2022, the case was closely followed by the public. Janice was sentenced to 31 years in prison, while Esmeralda received a 29-year sentence. However, both sentences came with one condition. They would serve them under the Department of Social Welfare and Development supervision until their 21st birthdays, after which they'd be transferred to adult prisons. Gwen and Lewis's parents had mixed feelings about the trial's outcome. While they recognized that the courts handed down the toughest punishment possible under the law, they felt the laws were too soft. The biggest issue, though, was Janice's complete lack of remorse. Cruz and Lavella were outspoken against Republic Act 9344, which limits the legal accountability of minors. According to the law, the minimum age for criminal liability is 15, and individuals between the ages of 15 and 18 can be held accountable, but they're sent to youth centers or rehab programs instead of adult prisons. This law prevents minors like Janice from being tried as adults, even for heinous crimes like hers. Many argued that kids shouldn't be capable of planning or committing such brutal acts. In the U.S. and other countries, minors committing these kinds of crimes would have been tried as adults. Cruz and Lavella felt strongly that Janice's age shouldn't excuse her from taking full responsibility, especially for such a violent and premeditated crime. This view was shared by many who felt the law was too lenient in cases like this. The couple publicly called for changes to the law, wanting those who commit violent acts at a young age to be held fully accountable. For them, the law's focus on rehabilitation rather than punishment made them feel that the justice system had failed their family. Some of the most heartbreaking facts to come out of the investigation revealed that Gwen almost escaped. She had the chance to run, but when she heard Janice calling for help, she went back, hoping to save her adopted sister. What makes it even more disturbing is that Gwen's kindness, her willingness to return to help, was met with betrayal. Now it's your turn. What's your take on this case? Do you think the sentences were too light for the suspects? Or do you believe the justice system got it right? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you like the way we create these videos and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.